Thank you for coming today. Thank you for all of you who are online watching. I want to address the governor's Safe Start plan and Seattle and King County's plan to move to reopen more of Seattle and our businesses and activities. But first, I would like to address the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. I cannot begin to imagine the deep grief and suffering that his family and loved ones are feeling. My heart and my tears go out to them, and I pray they get the support they need to make it through these dark days. Their grief, anger, and despair is shared by so many. The degrading and brutal way in which Mr. Floyd was treated reflected the deep and systemic impacts of racism in our country, particularly against Black Americans. The video of his last words, "I can't breathe," echoes through and is magnified by the dark history of our country, from slavery to today. The most fundamental duty of our public safety officials is to protect the lives of residents and uphold the law. The similarity to Eric Gardner's case is almost too much to bear. After 6 years, it is unfathomable they would see the same tragic ending for another unarmed African American, forcing out those words, "I can't breathe," as they lose their life at the hands of police. The officers that encountered George Floyd disregarded his humanity, which led to his death. As a former federal prosecutor, I believe it is right that the officer was charged and will be prosecuted for killing Mr. Floyd. Those standing by and failing to stop the action should also bear responsibility. In addition, I believe this should lead to an investigation by the United States Department of Justice. Only by these types of interventions and prosecutions in every instance of injustice will we see this type of violence end. Because what we should all know by now is that racism, fundamentally, at its core, is a denial of our common humanity. It gives permission to discrimination and to violence. To truly put an end to systemic racism, we must admit and acknowledge that it exists, and we must admit of its roots in our history. For it said that denial is the lifeblood and heartbeat of racism. We must admit and acknowledge the systemic and insidious ways in which communities of color are locked out and left behind by every system of our government, from education to healthcare, from criminal justice to banking and housing. We have seen these inequities deeply in the impacts of COVID-19. It is on all of us to demand better of ourselves, our leaders, and those who are charged with protecting the public peace. I am so thankful for the leadership of Chief Carmen Best, and I know her deep commitment to true community policing and to a culture of continuous improvement. I am similarly thankful for the leadership of Chief Scoggins, who knows that public safety means public life protection. I also know that the men and women of the Seattle Police Department who are speaking out against this injustice and who want to be held to the highest possible standards of our community speak for the department. I'm proud of the significant work that SPD has done to reform its practices. But we must continue to improve SPD and build upon the significant improvements gained in recent years under the consent decree. Among these is to continue to work on the racial disparities we see in criminal justice system and to continue the deep work with the community to build trust. I understand the pain and frustration that the community is feeling again. Tomorrow, people will join in Seattle to grieve, to protest, and to commit themselves to the cause of justice. We honor and cherish these rights. They make us better as a city and as a nation. I urge those of you who plan to take part to exercise your democratically earned and hard-fought rights to do so peacefully, to speak out against injustice, but to do so peacefully. We must also remember that we are still in the midst of a pandemic that has been particularly harsh on our communities of color. When you come, we need people to be safe and healthy. Please try to remain 6 feet apart. Follow COVID-19 precautions like face coverings. But know as a city we are stronger when we come together to solve our most difficult challenges, to grieve together, to strive for justice together. I want to turn it over to Chief Best for a few remarks on what she expects of her officers. I also want Chief Scoggins to make a few remarks as he's been leading our city's response to COVID-19 and also preparing for this weekend's events. After that, I'll make some remarks about the safe start and we'll take a few questions. Thank you very much.
Well, let me start by just thanking the mayor for those wonderful words of encouragement, her great leadership, her kindness and her empathy, and her love for this city. I am so appreciative just to hear our leader stepping forward the way that she has today. A few days ago, we all watched the tragic murder of George Floyd. We heard Mr. Floyd repeatedly call for help. We heard him yell over and over again, "I can't breathe." What really bothers me about this more than anything is everyone there, all the officers, showed a grave indifference to life. It was heartbreaking, upsetting, infuriating, and extremely disappointing to see this. And although it happened in Minneapolis, our own community mourns greatly for George Floyd's death. I am here to assure you that the Seattle Police Department is committed to protecting the life and the safety of everyone in this city. We believe in the sanctity of life, and we're going to continue our work to work through the grieving process of George Floyd's death. The Seattle Police Department supports people's rights to express their constitutionally protected free speech. And as we come together tomorrow and in the days ahead to rally behind our common cause, I implore everyone, should they choose to participate in the rallies and the demonstrations, to remain calm and peaceful and respectful. This should be a time for healing and a time for creating the dialogue about how our community can move forward together. We are all in this together. The department will facilitate peaceful protests as necessary. And while we empathize with every single person who is suffering under the death of Mr. George Floyd, we also want to make sure that we are obeying the laws, that we're not hurting other people, we're not committing violent crime, and we're not destroying property. This is our community, this is our city, and this is our home. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chief Scoggins, Fire Chief of the Seattle Fire Department. I want to echo Chief Best and thank Mayor Durkan and Chief Best for their leadership and their partnership as we go through many challenging times. I also want to acknowledge all of our cabinet peers who've been working extremely hard over the last 3 months to support community during a very difficult time. The tragic death of George Floyd can be felt across the nation, including here at home in Seattle. We are all grieving as a community about this terrible incident that occurred in Minneapolis. As your fire chief, as an African-American male, I understand the need to speak out about what is right. As the mayor and the police chief have said, this was wrong, plain and simple. As we all read and watch the news stories about what is occurring in Minneapolis and around the nation, it brings up many emotions for us and for me individually. People are in outrage about this incident, and they should be. We hope people express their constitutionally protected free speech rights peacefully. Our firefighters are committed to keeping the community safe, and we hope you will help others stay safe too. For those of you who are participating in rallies and protests, I respectfully ask that you continue to maintain physical distancing. We are still in the middle of a pandemic and need to follow recommendations for stopping the spread of COVID-19. While we hope it is not needed, we have a plan in place for responding to fire and medical emergencies during protests. We will be closely monitoring the protests and are tied in closely with the city's Emergency Operations Center. We can upscale our resources if necessary with reserve apparatus and additional staffing. I also have a duty to keep my firefighters safe. We hope that no one will intentionally try to start fires or injure others during these protests. As you are aware, fires are extremely hazardous and can spread rapidly with unintended consequences. And injuries in large groups can be challenging to locate, which could lead to delays in needed care for individuals. We recommend residents and businesses living in the downtown core place locks on your dumpster receptacles and move them away from buildings if you can. If you see a fire occurring, call 911 immediately to report it, and please do not assume someone else has already done it. We also will be upscaling our response for medical emergencies by sending an additional unit with the fire responding crew. This will occur if a 911 call is for an emergency near or at a protest location. Stay safe and stay healthy, Seattle, and know that the Seattle Fire Department will be there if you need us, and we know we are all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Scoggins and Chief Best. And I just want to emphasize that by giving these remarks, none of us expect that things will become violent or out of hand. But we have to know, watching across the country, about the possibility. And we urge people, we understand the need to come downtown, the need to be together, the need to express both grief and anger and frustration together. But please do it safely. Please do it respectfully. I now would like to turn and talk about the governor's order today on stay home, stay healthy. Earlier this afternoon, Governor Inslee announced that all counties in Washington state are eligible to apply for a modified Phase 1 starting Monday. Shortly after that, and just moments ago, King County Executive Dow Constantine and I, Dow Constantine and I have been in close consultation, and as he has announced, on Monday, King County will apply for a modified Phase 1 stage. Over the last 12 weeks, Seattle has been a model for the rest of the country in how we flatten the curve, save lives, and protect our healthcare workers. We needed to protect our healthcare system from becoming overwhelmed. Our region had been the epicenter of the pandemic. Washington State has led the way for the nation. Because of the efforts of our residents and our businesses, we have significantly reduced COVID-19. We did it before many places in the country and had no playbook. We relied on the people and residents of Washington State, King County, and Seattle to take actions against their own interests sometimes to protect each other. As we are nearing targets on testing and cases, I believe that Seattle and King County are ready to enter a modified Phase 1 approach to reopening additional businesses. But we must continue to follow public health guidance. I want to emphasize that applying for a modified Phase 1 doesn't mean we're out of the woods. COVID has not left our communities, and this is far from over. This virus knows no boundaries, and its resurgence can happen quickly, exponentially, and we all have to do our part still to practice good health safety measures. As we begin to reopen our society and our economy, businesses and cultural institutions, we can't relax all of the restrictions simultaneously. During this time, we need residents to continue to wear face coverings, practice good hygiene, and remain 6 feet apart. Remember, the only way the virus can spread is if someone with the virus comes in contact with someone who doesn't have it. The good news is we've done such a good job of flattening the curve that as many as 95% of the residents of Seattle and King County were never exposed to the virus. The bad news is that means 95% of us are susceptible to the virus. So as we come together, we give the virus the opportunity to spread again. Our adherence to public health guidelines will help ensure we continue to see decreases of COVID-19 infections, transmissions, and deaths. Our choices not only help determine when and how we reopen, they save lives. They save our healthcare system. And we should do it for those healthcare workers who work so selflessly around the clock in terrible conditions, sometimes without the protective gear they needed to save our community. Our city's role is to prioritize the most vulnerable and help bridge the gaps. As we begin to reopen, we need to support our residents and businesses with an emphasis on those that are most vulnerable. We will continue to work closely with our partners at Public Health, Seattle, King County, to ensure our small and mid-sized businesses owners have the resources they need to reopen successfully and meet the needs of their customers and employees. The businesses and their employees have to be safe, and their patrons have to be safe. We are taking control of our own procurement of PPE and critical testing materials to manage the impact of COVID-19. And as one of the region's largest employers, we will lead by example and follow the public health guidelines related to our facilities, our operations, and our 12,000 city workers. For example, the city just extended our work from home policies until Labor Day. I know that many of our business owners and residents have questions about what the state's guidance means for them, their businesses, and their lives. We'll continue to give you as much information as we can as soon as we have it, and make it accessible in many languages over many platforms. I appreciate our residents' patience, their compassion, and collaboration as we navigate this really unprecedented time together. With that, I'll be happy to take some questions to myself or to either of the chiefs.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for joining us today virtually for this press conference. As a reminder, I will read your name and the outlet that you're writing for, and then I will unmute your microphone for you to ask your question in the room. Our first question is from Daniel Beekman, Seattle Times, and he will be followed by Carolyn Bick from the South Seattle Emerald. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks very much. My question is for the mayor. Mayor Durkan, do you plan to attend any of the demonstrations or protests over this weekend related to George Floyd?
I don't know the answer to that yet, Dan. I've reached out to some of the organizers, and I think it's important that people feel that they have the ability to express their views and not feel that it is an event that's organized by elected officials or politicians. And so I've not made that decision yet, but I do want to emphasize that if people do come to any of the protests or rallies, that they make sure that they take the precautions, remembering that we are in the middle of a COVID-19 global pandemic, that they stay safe, that they bring hydration, and that they bring face coverings.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question is from Carolyn Bick, South Seattle Emerald, followed by Joel Moreno, Como TV. Carolyn Bick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I wanted to ask, since the regulations Inslee announced essentially require stores to choose whether or not to self-police, how will you ensure that stores that do decide to enforce the guidelines on the mask signs are equitably enforcing them, and that people of color aren't targeted, as we saw actually rather, I think last week, 2 separate incidents of people of color being targeted for wearing masks?
So, Carolyn, I think that's an excellent question. And the number one way we want to enforce this is through greater education and outreach to communities, so that people of color aren't singled out in any way and that they feel comfortable wearing face coverings. We really want to work with small businesses. It's harder for them to police their operations, but we've seen since the beginning of this pandemic, the only reason any of these measures have worked is because people have voluntarily complied, and we've done it together. So we again are going to have to make sure that as a community we respond together and we support each other. I have to also say I very much condemn anyone calling out or singling out anyone on the basis of race. We had not only the mask incidents that you indicated, but we had acts of hate against a number of our Asian community members last weekend. That can't be tolerated during this period of time. We have to work together. And if anyone sees an act of hate or discrimination, please do call 911. We will investigate it. We will stop it. We cannot allow that to happen during this time.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Carolyn. Joel Moreno from Como TV will be our next question, followed by Olivia Lavois from Q13. Joel, the floor is yours.
Two questions, please. The first for the mayor. Are you rethinking the timing of your request to end the consent decree in light of what's happened with George Floyd and the national outroar? And then for Chief Best, in regards to the protests tonight and this weekend, in order to make your own staffing decisions for these events, what can you share about the expectations of people coming in from outside the area, the local participation, and the possibility of even counter demonstrators, making it potentially more volatile?
So, Joel, I'll answer the first question, let the chief address probably the first and the second. Really important clarification, the city has not moved to end the consent decree. As you know, the Seattle Police Department was under investigation almost 10 years ago when I was the United States Attorney leading that investigation, and we put the consent decree in place. It had specific benchmarks that the police department had to meet under a sustainment plan. The judge indicated at the end of last year that it had met those benchmarks, and the court-ordered monitor agreed. We were simply seeking to terminate that sustainment plan, but made very clear to the court that we would continue to address the issues raised by the court and come back to the court on those. We know that trust is the number one thing that police departments need to operate, and as we've seen just in the last 2 days, it is the quickest thing to evaporate. We have to maintain trust, and the Seattle Police Department knows that. I was heartened by the statements of the Seattle Police Officers Guild today, condemning the death of Mr. Floyd and the officers' actions, and saying that they knew they needed to earn back trust because every act of every officer in America undermines the trust in every other police officer. Very proud again of the work that Chief Best has done to make sure that we have a culture of respect and true community policing and a culture of continuous improvement and reform. I'll let the chief address the question related to the weekend's events.
Great. Joel, you were asking about our staffing and deployments for this weekend. Am I remembering that correctly? Can he hear me? Yeah.
I do hear you. Just what you could share in basing your decisions about staffing on expectations about local participation, people coming from outside the area, or even counter demonstrators showing up.
Yeah, well, you know, Joel, we respond to there's about 300 protests a year in the city of Seattle, and 73 of which last year we had deployments. So we are, well prepared to respond to any protests or demonstrations. We do refresher training. We have a long history of doing well with these. So we're prepared for, all contingencies, but we're really hoping for and expecting the best. People are grieving and they're angry, and they have the right to come down to downtown Seattle or other places and express their First Amendment right to free speech. We fully support people doing that. On the other hand, we are going to have some additional staffing in case there are people who try to violate the law. That's typical to what we have done in every demonstration that we've had. I have every confidence in the planning and the management of our organization, and also every confidence in the people who are coming down here to express their concern and the disappointment with what's happened. So I think we're going to be prepared. I think it's going to be a fine day, and we're not going to have a repeat of what we've seen in other cities across the country. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We've had a slight re-rack of the question order here, so I will take a moment to let Chris Ingalls prepare himself from King 5, and also to remind everyone, please keep it to a single question so we make time for everyone's questions. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Derek. Chief Best, I wanted to ask you, so just to put a finer point on Joel's question, obviously there will be people who are coming out and lawfully protesting, and rightly so. Does the Seattle Police Department have any information that people may be coming, or there may be organizations that are planning violence or property destruction tonight or this weekend in Seattle?
You know, I don't have any specific intelligence about that, Chris. That could happen. Like I said, we prepare for every contingency that there is. Again, knowing that, you know, there's a potential for anything like that, we want to make sure we're prepared. But I absolutely believe that most people are just going to come down here to express, again, their First Amendment free speech right. That's what we're hoping happens. We have no other indication of anything else at this point.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chris. Our next question will be from Erica Barnett, C is for Crank, followed by David Croman at Crosscut. Erica, the floor is yours.
Hi, a question for Chief Best. I was wondering if you could elaborate on your comments to officers that were posted on the SPD blotter a couple days ago, in which you said that you have confidence that something like this, referring to the murder of George Floyd, would not occur in our city. What specifically gives you the confidence that something like that couldn't happen here?
Well, as you know, Erica, we have spent a lot of time under consent decree revamping and revising our policies, our procedures, our training, you know, the oversight in this organization. We have a Community Police Commission, an Office of Inspector General, an Office of Professional Accountability, all providing a lot of oversight into what we're doing in the functions, including a Force Review Board reviewing every level of force that happens. Additionally, part of our training that we have every year emphasizes and highlights in Section 5.02 the fact that if an officer sees anything that is illicit or illegal, those aren't the exact words, but something to that effect, that they have a duty to report. So we make sure that we emphasize it, we train it, and I believe 100% that the men and women of this organization know better and know that we would hold them accountable. And the men and women here have acted responsibly and fairly in everything that I've seen, and I just believe that that would not happen here because we've worked so hard over the last decade to make sure that we had an organization that could be a shining example for others to follow.
Thank you, Chief Best. And our next question is from David Croman, Crosscut. David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Have negotiations on the next contracts begun with SPMA and SPOG? And Mayor, have you put any more consideration into relaxing requirement, allowing restaurants to take over more sidewalk and street space?
Thanks, David, for that two questions. On the negotiations, SPMA has begun, but we took a pause because of COVID, and so we're now trying to determine, given COVID and some of the realities of the budget, what the path forward is. We're just about to start on SPOG, and we have to go to the council and talk to council on how to approach those negotiations and then reach out to SPOG. So those have not started yet. With regard to cafe space outside, we're working on a plan for that. Seattle Department of Transportation, together with Seattle Public Utilities, City Light, and Department of Neighborhoods and others, is trying to work out in each of the neighborhoods where might be some areas that we can convert sidewalks and even streets for people to use as outside tables so there can be outside dining. We have to work with business owners to determine who would maintain the hygiene of those tables and the like, but it's my hope that we can do that. Now, sometimes the weather doesn't really cooperate with outside dining in Seattle, but we've got to recreate and reimagine how our city works. And I think this gives us an opportunity to see how we can turn the streets into something that is much more geared for community.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, we've reached the end of our question and answer portion. Mayor, would you like to close us out with any final thoughts?
I would. Two things. First, on our response to COVID-19, I think the governor's order today confirms what we've all known, is people have worked really, really hard to get here. But it has had devastating consequences. We were a city with less than 3% unemployment, booming economy. We were announcing jobs seemingly every week. There were gross inequities in that economy that we were going to focus on this year, and then the bottom dropped out. We now have very high unemployment, a downtown that is unclear when it will come back, and every neighborhood has suffered the injuries of this. We've got to work together to build resilience for community. We've got to make sure that the inequities that have been laid bare by this virus are where we focus our attentions and make sure that we fix those inequities as we come out of this. In the meantime, the city has worked really hard to address those through grocery voucher programs, for meals for seniors, to meals for people experiencing homelessness, a whole range of things to build resiliency into our community, to help our small businesses and workers. But we are far from out of the woods. Until a vaccine is found, it will not be safe for people to come together in large numbers. It's frankly the thing for this weekend that worries me the most. I have faith in people, and I'm very hopeful that we will not see some of the violence that we've seen in other cities. But I think a lot of people will come. And we've got to remember that we can't let it become a spreading event where COVID-19 takes part of that event. So I want to say to people, thank you for the hard work you've been doing. Know that your city, your county, and your state are pushing really hard to get resources into people's hands, to put groceries on their table, and to reopen businesses so that businesses, again, can pay their employees, put people to work, pay their mortgages and their rent. It's going to be a long haul, but I believe in Seattle, and I think we can get through this and come out of it better than we were before. For this weekend, again, I can't say enough about the grief that I think our whole nation is feeling. And I have reached out to some of the organizers for this weekend. I want people to come together. It is right that they come together. It is part of what holds us accountable as a city, a state, and a nation. But let's do it safely. Let's do it to honor the man who was killed. And let's get through this together. Thank you.